Have you ever sat through a training session and, forgotten literally everything by the time you got back to your desk? We've all been there. Today, we're going to crack open the playbook on how to make sure your message doesn't just get heard, it actually gets remembered and, most importantly, used. Let's dive in. I want you to think back to the last mandatory workshop you had to go to. You know the one. Endless slides, a droning voice. You sat there, you nodded along, but let's be honest, how much do you actually remember from it? A week later, was any of it still there? Yeah, that feeling of wasted time, that's exactly the problem we're going to solve today. So, what's the deal here? Well, it all comes down to what I call the forgettable training problem. It's this baked-in assumption that if a trainer just stands up there and presents a bunch of information, people will magically learn it. But we all know that's not how it works. Without real engagement, without practice, that knowledge just vanishes, and you're left with zero long-term results.
And this is where we need to totally flip the script. The fix isn't about having flashier slides or a more booming voice. No, the real solution is about getting inside the learner's head and understanding the mechanics of how our brains actually absorb and hold on to information in the first place. All right, so that brings us to the first big secret. You have to think like an adult. Now that sounds super simple, right? But it is absolutely foundational. You just can't teach adults the same way you teach kids. Their motivations, their needs, their entire outlook on learning is completely different. And wow, the difference is night and day. Kids learn because, well, they have to. It's kind of their job. But adults, we're a totally different story. We're driven by practicality. We need to see the what's in it for me right away, and we want to have some control over how we learn. We're problem solvers, not empty buckets waiting to be filled up with facts.
Let's break this down into 6 key traits. So adult learners are self-directed, they're practical. They bring a whole lifetime of experience to the table, and they're juggling a million other responsibilities. And because of all that, they can be a little less open-minded and have super high expectations. Bottom line, if what you're teaching isn't immediately useful, you lost them. It's that simple.
So now that we know who we're teaching, the big question is, how do we actually teach them? Well, the answer is to move away from the monologue, just talking at people, and instead create a multi-sensory experience that actually wakes up their entire brain.
We basically learn in 3 main ways: seeing, hearing, and doing. Think about it like this: learning to play a sport, right? You can watch a game, that's seeing. You can have a coach explain a play, that's hearing. But do you really know it? No way. Not until you get on the field and actually kick the ball yourself. That's doing. The most powerful, most permanent learning happens when we combine all 3.
And this, right here, leads us to one of the biggest, most common mistakes, the dreaded PowerPoint monologue. We have all suffered through this. The presenter turns their back to the audience and just reads these giant walls of text straight from the screen. It's not just boring, it's actively working against the way our brains are wired to learn.
This whole phenomenon actually has a name. It's called the redundancy effect. When you throw the exact same information at people in written words and spoken words at the same time, you're not reinforcing the message. You're actually creating a traffic jam in their brain. It overloads their ability to process, which makes it harder for them to remember anything.
And don't just take my word for it. The researcher who figured this out, John Sweller, put it perfectly. He said that talking about a diagram is great because you're using people's eyes and ears for 2 different complementary things. But reading the same words that are already written on the screen, that just clogs up the whole system. Okay, so this leads us to what is, honestly, the most critical part of all of this: practice. Come on, learning is not a spectator sport, right? You can't learn just by watching from the sidelines. To make knowledge stick, to make it permanent, people have to get their hands dirty and actually apply what they're hearing. But, and this is a huge but, just doing something over and over again, that's not practice. That's just repetition. And repetition can actually lock in bad habits. The real magic ingredient, the thing that turns mindless repetition into actual growth, is feedback. Good, guided, supportive feedback.
So how do you give that kind of amazing feedback? Well, there's a really simple and super effective tool called the feedback sandwich. It's easy. First, you start with something specific and positive that you noticed. Then, you offer one clear, actionable suggestion for how to improve. And finally, you wrap it up with another positive, encouraging observation. It just makes the constructive part so much easier to hear and act on.
And on top of the sandwich method, here are a few other golden rules to live by. First, be specific. Don't just say good job. Tell them why it was a good job. Second, focus on the future, what they can do next time, instead of just dwelling on past mistakes. And finally, always have empathy. Try to see things from their perspective.
All right, so we've got the big ideas down. Understand your audience, engage their senses, give great feedback. But how do you pull it all together into a coherent plan? That's where the trainer's blueprint comes in. This is your roadmap to success.
You see, a really good training plan, it forces you to think through every single detail. You have to clearly define your goals, design activities that will actually help people meet those goals, and figure out all the little things, materials, timing, and crucially, how you're going to check if learning actually happened. This is the thing that stops you from just defaulting to a boring lecture.
And that really brings us to the single biggest idea I want you to walk away with today. Being a great trainer has almost nothing to do with being a great presenter. It's about being a great designer, an architect of learning experiences that are active, engaging, and truly unforgettable. So, I'll leave you with this question. The next time you're up in front of a room, are you going to deliver a monologue that everyone forgets by lunch? Or are you going to design an experience that actually sparks real, lasting change? Really, the choice is all yours.